Colleagues, I call this meeting back to order. This is meeting number 10 of the Standing Committee on Finance, pursuant to the order of reference of Tuesday, October 29, 2013, continuing our study of Bill C-4, a second act to implement certain provisions of the budget table in Parliament on March 21st, 2013. We're very pleased to have with us here today the Honourable Jim Flaherty, Minister of Finance, with us at the committee. Minister, welcome back to the committee. Bienvenue à cette committee. I understand you will have an opening statement for the members, and then we'll have questions from your colleagues here. So welcome. You may begin at any time.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your excellent work as an interviewer in Edmonton.
I heard those were the toughest questions you had in over 2 years, apparently.
Well, I've heard David Frost is really worried. I'll
Okay, order.
Colleagues, members of the Finance Committee, I know you work very hard, and I appreciate what you do, and the consultations that you do matter a lot in terms of the formulation of each year's budget. So I thank all of you for that. I know you travel a lot and you're away from your families, and it's not easy. So I thank all of you for that. My officials are here tonight in case you ask anything complicated. They will attempt to deal with it. Je remercie le comité pour son...
I would like to thank the committee for its work on pre-budgetary consultations.
Pre-budget consultations are a key part of the budget process. Your recommendations inform the budget, and that's for real, because you can go back and look at the budgets over the last 6 or 7 years and see lots of recommendations that were in the report of this committee over those years. For budget this year, this included assurer l'équité et la neutralité du régime fiscal.
Ensuring the equality and neutrality of the fiscal regime, the tax system, continuing to eliminate tax loopholes.
By eliminating inefficient fossil fuel subsidies consistent with our G20 commitments. I should add that we have eliminated all of the tax subsidies that once existed for the oil sands. And for those who think otherwise, they ought to check the record. We are trying to enhance the neutrality of the tax system by eliminating inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. This is consistent with our commitments in the G20. We are reviewing legislation and regulations to ensure the safety and security of our financial sector and modernizing Canada's immigration system to better focus on labor market needs. Let me provide some context to this. And it is this. In 2006, when we became the government in February 2006, what was there to worry about economically? Well, the Prime Minister and I thought perhaps the United States, because they're running large deficits and accumulating significant public debt. So how do we protect Canada? My view was that we pay down public debt, which we did. We paid down about $38 billion of public debt in the first couple of years that we were the government. And then the Great Recession happened, but it didn't start there, as you know. It started with a credit crisis, and then it moved into a crisis in the real economy. And then we had to make a choice about what are we going to do, continue to try to balance or give it up. And what we decided to do was to run a very large deficit. of almost $58 billion in January 2009. But the plan always was to get back to balance in the medium term. And we're almost there. In 2015-16, the budget will be balanced. And that's, I think it's important for business confidence in Canada. At the same time, and others have different points of view on this, at the same time, I think it was very important that we spent that money, borrowed the money, and spent it in 2009. And I give the public officials a lot of credit at Treasury Board, at infrastructure, at transportation, at finance, for getting the money out the door, because that was the danger. The danger was millions of people unemployed and a long, deep, dark recession. We can always look back and say, well, it didn't turn out that way. Well, yeah, but we did some things that helped it not turn out that way. And our plan worked, unlike some of our colleagues in the G7 who are still struggling. Moody's says, and all the rest of them say, that we have the only economy that's created over 1 million net new jobs since the depth of the recession. We have, of course, a AAA credit rating, and now there are only a handful of countries in the entire world that have a AAA credit rating, which is regrettable. The World Economic Forum for the 6th straight year has ranked Canada's banking system the soundest in the world. Le Fonds Monétaire International et l'Organisation de Coopération,
The IMF and the OECD believe that Canada will have the strongest growth amongst the G7 nations over the next few years.
And I don't sit here and say to people who are knowledgeable, like the members of the House Finance Committee, that things are rosy. Things are okay, but we're only growing at 1.8% or 2%, or a little bit better than that. The American economy is doing a little bit better now, which is a good thing. The European economy, as you've seen in the most recent statistics, is weakening, which is a concern. But dealing with deficit and debt, I think the most important thing we can do for our country is get rid of our deficit. We will in 2015, 2016. In the annual financial report, the deficit fell to $18.9 billion in 2012-13. This is nearly $7 billion less than projected. And that's down more than 1/4 from the deficit of $26.3 billion in 2011-12, and down by nearly 2/3 from the $55.6 billion deficit recorded in 2009-2010. A lot of this has to do with the way we spend. And I won't go on too long, Chair, but as you know, there are 3 major areas of spending federally. One is transfers to the provinces. We have not reduced transfers to the provinces. We have maintained the 6% health transfer. We have maintained the 3% Canada Social transfer. We have stuck to it even during the bad times. And then with the transfers to individuals, persons with disabilities, seniors, and so on, we have continued the same level of funding. We've also continued the same level of funding about research, development, our granting councils, the money we give to universities, the money we give for postdoctoral fellowships, all of those things, because they're vitally important for the future of our country. So where do you save money? And you know this from looking at these subjects. You save it by looking at your own program spending, which we've done, and which we've tightened. The result of all of that is that we have a situation now where we can easily balance in 2015, 2016. And I'll spare you some of this other stuff. I think we're doing some important things in this bill, one of which is to extend the hiring credit. It actually works. We're all members of Parliament. I'm sure you hear it at home. It creates jobs, especially among smaller entrepreneurial businesses. So that's a good thing. We're increasing and indexing the lifetime capital gains exemption, and this is the first increase since 1988, which is a long time. And we're expanding the ACCA, the Accelerated Capital Cost Allowance, to further encourage investments in clean energy exploration. We're closing some tax loopholes. We're again modernizing the Canada Student Loans Program. We are phasing out, which is controversial in Quebec, but we are phasing out the tax subsidies like the labor-sponsored venture capital corporations tax credit, which quite frankly is inefficient and was not accomplishing the goal for which it was intended, and was phased out by Ontario about 5 or 6 years ago. So there you are, and I hand the chair back to David Frost.
Very much, Minister, for your opening remarks. We'll have questions from members, and we'll start with Mr. Rankin for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Welcome, Minister, to the Finance Committee. Since this is an omnibus bill, another omnibus bill affecting matters that are far beyond the world of finance, that you've referenced, I want to talk about something quite different and quite distinct, if I may. I have a question that begs another question, namely, why are health and safety protections that are found in the Canada Labour Code in a budget bill in the first place? My specific question is this, Minister. Something very troubling was just brought to our attention. It appears that departmental officials at the Human Resources Committee may have provided misinformation. My colleague, the member for Newton North Delta, asked how many refusals of unsafe work resulted in some sort of enforcement action. Officials told her, quote, "The administrative data doesn't allow us to make that direct link," close quote. However, this committee has just been provided with evidence that that claim is not true, that somewhere between 45 and 52% of work refusals could result in an enforcement action. So could you explain why officials have only presented the fact as a fact that 20% of refusals result in a finding of danger, while failing to tell us the fact that nearly half of refusals result in an enforcement action?
That's Part 3, Division 5, so...
Yes, I'm sure.
And Ms. Baxter, if you can introduce yourself, please.
Yes, Brenda Baxter. I'm the Director General of Workplace, and in fact, I was one of the officials that appeared at the committee. And as far as the question goes with respect to the link between refusals to work and directions issued by our officers, to start with, what I want to say is that we have provided information with respect to the number of refusal to work situations that resulted in a situation of danger or no danger, and we stress that the protections provided to workers are not changing with respect to the proposed amendments. With respect to further details with respect to the data that's available through our administrative data, we are looking at trying to compile the information that was requested by the committee. So we are working on that information. We have not completed that compilation because it is looking at a 10-year period, and we're requiring to do any sort of connection to that data on a manual basis.
Apparently, that's not the end of what we've been told, and you may be appropriately here to answer this question. Apparently, the relevant ADM told my colleague, the member for Cape Breton-Canso, that the number of health and safety officers had not declined from 150 to 85. However, we have evidence in front of us that shows that's not the case. Do you have any response to that?
Yes, I do. I think the information that was provided is looking at all of the labor affairs officers in the labor program that enforce both Parts 2, which is health and safety, and Part 3, which is labor standards. So that's the collective workforce that enforces Part 2 and Part 3 of the Canada Labor Code. Under that, there is a subgroup that does enforce health and safety, and this number has remained at an average of 80 over the past 5 years.
So there has been no reduction in the
No, there
group.
has not.
So, Minister, I wonder if you could explain then how the definition of danger to, quote, a severe and imminent danger, definition of the danger of severe and imminent danger makes Canadians safer.
I guess I'll take that one on too.
Yes.
So, in fact, what we're doing is we're clarifying the definition of danger. And if you look at across all the other occupational health and jurisdictions across the country, there is no definition of danger. So, what we're providing is a clearer definition that removes some of the ambiguities in the previous definition. The clearer definition still provides protections for imminent or serious situations that impact life or health, which would include situations such as an impact of immediate sort of cut or broken bone, as well as impact on your health that could be longer term, like an occupational illness. So essentially, it is clarifying that definition of danger, and it goes back to the data that you identified, where we looked at our refusals, and 80% of those did not result in a decision of danger.
Okay, very briefly.
Just a quick question for the Minister. Why are changes to health and safety protections in the Canada Code in a budget bill?
There are references, as you know, colleague, to the ability to pay. And that's important in terms of collective negotiations, because there has been a dearth of attention to the ability of the people of Canada to pay for all these bills. And we want the arbitrators and the mediators to pay attention, as they do in some of the provinces, to making sure the people of Canada can afford their recommendations.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Rankin. We're going to go to Mr. Saxton, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here today. And first of all, Minister, I want to thank you for the leadership that you've shown in the Canadian economy, governing the Canadian economy over the last almost 8 years. These have not been easy times. In fact, these have been very challenging times, especially during the Great Recession of 2008 and 2009. And Canada has emerged very strong, thanks in no small part to the sound economic policies that you've introduced during that time. So thank you off the top for your leadership. My question today is regarding small businesses. And we all know that small businesses play a vital role in the creation of jobs and economic growth in Canada. And while Canada has performed very well in respect to our peers, small businesses across the country still continue to face challenges, and there are still too many Canadians out of work. So I'd like to ask, what in Economic Action Plan 2013 will be supporting small businesses and encouraging job creation?
Well, I want to thank my parliamentary secretary for that challenging question. The biggest thing, I think, to get to the point is the hiring credit for small business. This is a big deal. All of us are members of Parliament. We talk to people in our ridings. We talk to small business people. Tons of people have been hired because of this hiring credit for small business. So this is important. It's also not inexpensive to the federal treasury, but important it is. So we're going ahead with that again. We've already, since 2006, reduced the small business tax rate from 12% to 11%. We've increased the small business limit to $500,000. And we also provided up to $1,000 to help defray the cost of hiring new workers. But I think it's the more important thing is to try to get people into the workforce. And I see it in young people. I see it in my riding. You probably see it in your constituencies as well. Young people who are talented, who are good, men, women, young women, they just need a chance. And I think the hiring credit for small business helps give them that foot in the door.
Thank you, Minister. Now, I know that during your time as Finance Minister, you introduced the P3 Canada, Public-Private Partnerships Canada. And I just want to ask, how do you see this helping our infrastructure development in this country?
I think it's evolved very well. It had its growing pains, like a lot of new institutions do. It is really into the transportation business now, around Edmonton, around Calgary, in Toronto, Union Station, in Vancouver. It's a very useful function. And we have, as you know, the large pension funds in Canada. And it always struck me as peculiar that we did not access them. I mean, they go bid on airports in Australia and not talk to us about our airports. So things are changing. Things are, I think, improving. And the board at P3 Canada and the CEO are both very strong.
Thank you very much. I'm fine. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Saxton. Mr. Bryson, for your round, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, according to your recent update, the EI account is moving back or moved back to balance in 2015 instead of previously predicted to go back to balance in 2016. You had promised to set the EI rate at a break-even level once the account was balanced. But C4 actually freezes EI premiums at an artificially high rate until the end of 2016. Now, that will result in a $5.6 billion more in payroll tax than that which is required to pay out the benefits during that period. You've called EI premiums a job-killing payroll tax. The recovery is a tenuous one. Why don't you let the EI rates fall in 2016 instead of keeping them higher into 2017?
I thank you for the question. We're actually freezing EI rates for the next 3 years so that there will be no uncertainty with employers or employees. It's a similar sort of argument that I hear from some of the provinces now, that they say to me, well, you should raise CPP taxes, payroll taxes. And I say to them, no, we have a fragile economy. We're growing at 1.8 or 2% or so.
But I'm not asking.
No, I'm just saying to you, it's the same sort of argument.
I'm saying let them go down. I'm not suggesting that they go up.
No, stability is important.
Well, Minister, but your argument with the provinces is that increasing payroll premiums would be bad for the economy, yet C4 actually keeps payroll premiums artificially high for a longer period of time. So why not simply allow EI premiums to self-balance with payouts as the account moves into balance in 2015? Because if your argument to the provinces is that artificially high or premiums on jobs or wages will hurt the economy, why are you keeping them high yourself in C4?
to provide certainty so that businesses know, especially small businesses, that they will not be faced with increases, which has been the history. You're a member of a political party, well, you are now,
Yes.
of a political party that stole $50 million.
Oh.
Or was it billion?
Oh, yes.
Billion.
Yeah.
From EI.
And you're a member.
So, I mean, I don't need any
Yeah.
lectures from you about how to run an EI system.
Certainly. You were part of a provincial government that padded its books with asset sales, and now you're proposing to do the same here.
I'm part of a provincial government had to close hospitals because your government
No.
cut spending to the
Jim,
provinces.
please, let's focus on your current job. You're not in provincial politics anymore.
Okay, let's do questions and answers through the chair, please.
Question, Minister. Your fiscal update assumes $1.5 billion in asset sales in 2015 and 2016. Can you tell us precisely what assets you'll be selling?
We have, as we've done in the document, we've listed the shares that the people of Canada own in General Motors, which are...
That's the previous year, Minister.
It's more than 100,000.
Oh, but that's the previous year.
No, that's the total.
I'm talking about 2015,
we have
2016.
Canada's, the taxpayers' interest in Hibernia. We have the taxpayers' interest in the Dominion coal blocks in Western Canada. We have the taxpayers' interest, the people's interest, in other ports in British Columbia.
30 seconds.
There's lots of money. This is a very conservative estimate.
Like your $11 billion in proposed asset sales in the autumn of 2008. How many of those were sold, Minister? How much was raised?
I tell you, I'm happy with my record. If you're not, God love you.
Obvious we're not.
Yeah.
Okay, on that love, we will move on to Mr. Keddy, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome to our witness. Minister, good to have you at committee. I want to change the subject a little bit back to the lifetime capital gains exemption. I want to come at this from a little different angle than I think a lot of people look at it, and I'd like to hear your comments on it. The great thing about lifetime capital gains exemption for small business was to allow for intergenerational transfer of those assets. I don't think that was the full reason for bringing it in, but it certainly worked in agriculture, it works in fishery, it works in forestry, and it'll work in other small businesses as well. But the idea of increasing the basic lifetime capital gains, I think now to $800,000, and to index it to inflation. Have we done any studies on what that will do for intergenerational transfer?
Question. Who wants to win?
Committee?
Good evening, Mr. Chair. With response to the lifetime capital gains exemption, as you've indicated, it's increasing from $750,000 to $800,000, and then will be indexed for inflation. With respect to the impact, we don't have any specific intergenerational information. What we do know is approximately, I believe it's 68,000 filers benefit from the LCGE. And the expectation is, at least at the front end, that between 2,000 and 4,000 people will be able to take advantage of the growth in the LCG limit. And I guess the other thing I'd point out for the committee is that with the change to an indexed system, when an individual accesses the LCGE, as the indexed amount increases, that will generate new LCGE space for the individual.
Okay, thank you. The other question, Minister, is in relation to closing tax loopholes. Well, people leap through them, I think. The international tax evasion and aggressive tax avoidance have a terrific fiscal cost to governments and taxpayers. It undermines the revenue base and undermines public confidence in the tax system and fairness and equity of the tax system, quite frankly. We've, in Economic Action Plan 2013, we've strengthened the integrity, I think, of Canada's tax system by going after these loopholes that people are leaping through. And do we have some specific numbers on the amount of dollars that are out there? I know it's very hard to estimate, but we must have some numbers on the amount that we stand to collect through closing these loopholes.
I bet we do.
In terms of closing tax loopholes and improving the fairness of the tax system, the 6-year total projected by Economic Action Plan 2013 is $4.4 billion. That's a global figure. And of course, we had talked with the committee about the various aspects of it, the character conversion transactions, synthetic dispositions, giving the CRA additional tools in terms of being allowed additional years when someone has failed to file an appropriate Form T1135 and have failed to report foreign income.
30 seconds.
No, I can't do it in 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Mr. Caron, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup. Bonjour, monsieur.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Minister.
Phasing out of the tax credit on labor-sponsored venture capital. It's a very big deal in Quebec. 90% of the tax credit right now goes to the savers, those who are actually contributing to the two major funds in Quebec. It's a model that has worked well. Quebec is actually third among all jurisdictions in OECD in terms of the venture capital under management as a share of GDP, after Israel and after the United States. As a share of GDP, Quebec actually invests right now almost 3 times more as the Canadian average and over 4 times more than Ontario. Now, both funds came to you with a deal asking for the government to not phase out the tax credit, but in return to actually control the tax expenditure, reducing it by about 30% over the next 10 years, and injecting about the equivalent of $2 billion in the Venture Capital Action Plan. That would be 5 times the contribution of the federal government. Yet, they haven't received any answer. We had Mr. Gupta from the Canadian Information Technology Association saying it was a good deal. We have the Canadian Venture Capital Association, Venture Capital and Private Equity Association, who's saying it's a good deal. You have the Fédération des Chambres de commerce du Québec, the Fédération des jeunes chambres de commerce, la Chambre de commerce du Montréal métropolitain, les manufacturiers exportateurs du Québec qui disent tous et toutes que c'est un bon deal.
All of these groups say that it's a good deal and that the government should accept it. Why did you not do that? Why did you refuse? I would like to thank the honourable member for his question. This is a major challenge. In Quebec, the province of Ontario created a new program.
When I look at this, this is not effective. This was created to encourage investment in small business. What it's become is a tax haven where people can go hide their money, which is okay. Tax planning, that's fine. Lots of people do it. But it doesn't accomplish the goal that was intended. That's why, for example, the province of Ontario got rid of it. The OECD, if we're going to look at someone independent, said the LSVCCs have distorted the market for venture capital, lowering the average quality of deals and limiting the supply of equity to non-traditional industries and newer companies. The governance structure leads to less skilled fund managers and poorer fund performance. Overall, the damaging effects of these tax credits on the financing of innovation, along with their fiscal costs, present a clear argument for their elimination.
Minister, I only have like a minute and a half, 2 minutes for my last question. There's no, like, outside of a Paris-based study from the OECD, outside of the testimony of Jack Mintz, I'm just saying that we had witnesses after witnesses, especially from Quebec, who are actually telling you it's been very effective and has kept Quebec as a leader in Canada. On a eu un de vos fonctionnaires qui est venu ici.
One member of your department was here, and I asked what impact this would have on venture capital invested in Canada. What would it have? What impact would it have on savings levels in Canada and in Quebec? People use tax havens because or tax shelters because they're saving for their retirement. And if there's a comparative study on what's done by the funds and what the government is going to do, there's no impact study that's been done. So I'd like to know, how can we make a decision, such a major decision, on a model that's so important for Quebec without studying the impact on all these points?
Comprends, Monsieur le Député, mais
I hear what you're saying, but I need to look at the system in Canada.
pas seulement au Québec.
Not just in Quebec, not just in Ontario. Now, I see that this is a mechanism that is not working. However, for investment in small and medium-sized businesses, the goal, well, that's the goal for this program. Thank you, Mr. Cattell. Mr. Adler, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And being the selfless person that I am, what I'm going to be doing, because our time is limited, I'll be sharing my time with Mr. Van Kesteren, if that's okay with you, Chair.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I do want to ask the Minister about the freezing of EI premiums and the hiring tax credit. But what I just want to preface my comments by saying that in the riding of York Centre, we organize business roundtables, minimum 2 a month, and we do them year-round, just to keep a pulse on what the business people are saying and business leaders are saying. And they have said unanimously that the freezing of EI premiums and the small business hiring tax credit have led to job creation, have created stability in terms of the EI premiums, which is what business needs, and business demands stability. And with that stability and with the advantage of the hiring tax credit, they've been able to hire more people, which in turn have been able to more people pay more taxes, and we're able to fund, of course, more of our government operations and what's needed to be funded. So I do want to ask the minister if he could just comment on the necessity of the importance of freezing EI premiums, rather, for small business, how important that is in the job creation grand scheme of things, and if you comment also on the small business hiring tax credit, how successful that has been for Canadian small business in particular.
I thank the member for his difficult question. The freezing of EI premiums will save employers and workers about $660 million in 2014 alone. And we will be able to still go forward with our 217 plan about balancing the EI fund. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business is entirely supportive, and we will not ever again do what the previous Liberal government did, and that is we will not steal money from the EI plan in order to balance our budget.
Thank you.
2.5 minutes, Mr. Van.
Perfect. Okay.
Thank you, Minister, for being here. And very quickly, I was privileged to hear you at the Economic Club about a year ago. And you shared with the audience just what happened in 2009, just how precarious a position the world was at. And we get so much criticism, and you've had criticism about increasing the deficit and spending that money. But you had a great explanation. I wonder if you could just share with us again why that was so critical and what actually transpired, and as a result of it, how that got us out of a really, really bad situation.
Thank you for the question. I'll try to do this in 30 or 45 seconds. We were in Australia at an APEC meeting with finance ministers, and we were all concerned about too much cash sloshing around the world. This was in August 2007, July 2007. In August 2007, I was at home on a Sunday afternoon, and the Secretary of the Treasury, Hank Paulson, called me and said, well, now we know where the problem is, subprime mortgages in the United States. He said, that's the bad news. The good news is we know where the problem is. And I went down to the kitchen. I said to Christine, I said, I'm going back to Ottawa. And we have been struggling with this ever since. First the credit crisis, then the crisis in the real economy. And you know from your own business background how difficult things became for small and medium-sized businesses in Canada. So, in any event, we dealt with it in a fairly dramatic way, and I still think that it was a great day for Canada when the opposition parties recognized the seriousness of the economic situation, which they did, and I recognize them for recognizing that when it really mattered. Except for Scott.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Van Kesteren. Colleagues, I know we're bumping up against 7 o'clock. If we could ask the Minister to finish the second round here. We have 2 more members with questions. If we can do that, OK, merci. We'll go to Mr. Côté, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Merci, Monsieur le Ministre.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here with us today. I would just like to remind you that the opposition parties, and particularly the NDP, worked very hard to convince you of the problems that were coming back in the day. But to go back to these questions concerning the FTQ, the Bank of Canada has reduced its growth projections for Canada's economy. The Governor of the Bank of Canada, in a speech in Toronto, talked about trouble in our export sector. He said that we're losing 1 in 5 export businesses. So to go back to the FTQ, Ontario has seen its position deteriorate when we talk about venture capital funds since the changes were made there. It's at 36% for Quebec, and for Ontario, yes, 36%, the level of capital in Quebec, and 36% in Ontario concerning Canada as a whole. However, Ontario has a much higher population than Quebec. Minister, would it not have been preferable then to accept the deal that was offered by the fund and to put in place your initiative for a $400 million venture capital fund? This seems to be a major risk for the future.
Je vous remercie.
I would like to thank the honourable member for his question. We are faced with several challenges in Canada because our country doesn't have a very large population. 35 million people, give or take. We need our federation to work. We need to speak to each other. And I speak constantly with my colleagues in the finance departments of the various provinces in Quebec and in the other provinces. I hope that we will see economic growth for the country as a whole. But the reality is that there's uneven growth. It's clear. There's more growth in the West and less growth in the East. That is the current situation in Canada. And we need to have, I think, that we need to have in Ottawa, within the federal government, we need to deal with this issue. No, I understand, Minister, that you've ceded to certain specific interests instead of looking at the overall context on this subject. I have 1 minute left. All right, I'd like to go back to EI funding. I was rather dissatisfied by the responses I got in the previous consultation concerning the $57 billion accumulated before 2009. If we eliminate that, well, that goes against practices seen elsewhere, for example, in the insurance field or in retirement savings funds. How do you justify this strategy concerning this surplus of $57 billion?
If you'll forgive me, to basic principles. The purpose of the employment insurance program isn't to provide income for people from time to time. It's to provide income to people when they're out of work, when they're down on their luck, when things haven't gone well for them. That's what it's there for. And we have to remind ourselves of that. It seems to me, being in government, being a minister, and being in the cabinet, we have to remind ourselves that that's the purpose of the fund. The provinces run social assistance funds. I know, I was a provincial finance minister, I know how much it costs. But I think we have to be careful that we remember the purpose of the fund. And if we can use it, and with the Jobs Grants Program, I think we will be able to use it to retrain people and make sure people can match the jobs that are available in this country. I met with one of our Western premiers a couple of weeks ago, and he said to me how awkward he felt flying to Europe to hire people to come and work in Western Canada when he was flying over parts of our country with double-digit unemployment. So I'm all for people retraining, and I'm all for people working.
Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Merci.
Merci,
The last
Monsieur le
round
Ministre.
will be Mr. Hoback, please.
Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here this evening and taking time to spend it with us. I know you're a very busy individual. I'm just listening to my colleagues across the table here talk about EI, and I just can't remember. It just makes me think about what they're proposing here a couple of years ago about a 45-day work year where you can work 45 days and all of a sudden go on EI. And now Mr. Bryson's talking about we got to lower EI rates even more. So, here's a party that one day is going to make it so easy to get EI that provinces like Saskatchewan is going to have even a tougher time finding people. And then the next day he wants to lower EI rates. So we're not sure how he's ever going to spend get the money to spend what he wants to spend on. And that comes back to what you talked about on stability and creating stability for the business community, and whether it's EI rates or Canada Pension Plan rates. We just brought out the pooled pension plan, and that is a program that I think will have some benefit once people start to take it up and give it time to take it up. But one thing I wanted to ask you about is the break-even mechanism in 7 years for EI. When you looked at EI going forward, can you maybe just touch on that and what that will do to EI rates going forward once that's in place?
Well, for 2017 onwards, the EI rate will be set according to the 7-year break-even rate setting mechanism. And this will ensure that premiums are no higher than they need to be to pay for the EI program. It's as simple as that. We have frozen rates for the next few years, but that's because it's a fragile world out there, and we have to be careful.
So as a business owner, my concern would be is 2 years from now, let's say the economy should go for the worst. All of a sudden we have higher unemployment, and my concern would be as employers, these rates are going to go up now because of that. Well, now you're saying they're going to be froze. They're going to be stuck, so at least I can bank on what I'm going to be paying for those payroll costs. And then as far as Canada Pension, how does it relate to there, and how would the impact be on EI or hiring if we all of a sudden yanked up CPP rates?
Well, there's lots of people in Canada who want to raise rates on employers.
But the benefit of that or the drawback?
Well, I think people forget that the CPP is a contributory plan. So every time the government raises rates, the employer pays more and the employee pays more. And if you're self-employed, the hit is even greater. So I just say, whoa, back on that, and we just better be careful. Let's get this economy moving. Let's get back up to growth rates like we used to have, and then we can look at such things. At the same time, encourage Canadians to make intelligent choices and save money.
And again, Minister, if you look back to 2008, you've given us a good walk through time here on some of the things that you were dealing with back in those times. If you look now, and you compare Canada compared to the rest of the world, give us a little bit more information on that.
Well, I think we're, I don't know how to put it. I think we took the risk, and the risk worked. But it worked not because of the Prime Minister or me, but because the public servants got the job done.
Well, you had a
got the money out the door.
Got the money out the door, and
yep.
I know in my riding, the amount of money we spent on infrastructure. This is hard infrastructure that was required. It was going to have to be done sooner
yep.
or later.
You know, and if we had to do it again, I'd do it again. I'm not ideological about such things. You have to, when you're faced with things like that, you have to look at, millions of people and losing their jobs.
Okay. Well, thank you, Minister.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Holbach. Mr. Minister, thank you very much for being with us here this evening. We appreciate your input into this process on the Budget Implementation Act. And colleagues, we will suspend for a few minutes and bring our last panel of the day forward. Thank you. Merci.
Pleased to welcome Armin Yonesian from the Canadian Centre for Policy.
It's Bill C4.
Bill C4, sorry. Bill C4. I know. Bill C4. That was last year's. But Bill C4, Budget Implementation Act. And we're pleased to welcome Armin Yonesian, Senior Economist from the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. Monique Moreau, Senior Policy Analyst for the CFIB. Michel Gauthier from Imagine Canada. And Marie-Hélène Arruda from the Mouvement Autonome et Solidaire des Sans-Emploi Réseau Québécois. And we'll begin with Ms. Yonesian. This is going to be these 5-minute rounds initially, and then we'll go to Q&A. So welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First of all, an introduction and a context to my comments. Thank you very much for the invitation to appear before the committee as members of Parliament review the second budget implementation bill for the 2013 budget. It's a particular honor to be able to appear as a witness, since this committee, I understand, will be restricted to hearing only 7 hours of witness testimony, in addition to what you've just heard from the Minister, over only 2 days of hearings. In these 2 days, parliamentarians will not have an opportunity to meaningfully review the impact of all the measures embedded in this legislation, which run from tax and spending changes to EI reforms to conflicts of interest in financial institutions, a brand new system of processing economic immigrants, and new rules for choosing Supreme Court justices. And I have left out dozens of additional changes, including over 60 amendments to the Canada Labour Code, and a new restricted definition of danger and appeal of that definition of danger that the Canadian Bar Association says turns the clock back by decades on health and safety concerns for workers. In 1994, a freshly elected MP, Stephen Harper, asked the Speaker of the House of Commons to rule out a budget bill, to rule a budget bill out of order because of its sweeping scope. It affected public sector pay. It affected EI measures and payroll taxes, a reduction in federal spending through the Canada Assistance Plan. It offered an extension of transportation subsidies and the ability for the CBC to borrow money for the first time. At that time, Mr. Harper said, this in quotes.
I'm awfully sorry. The translators have indicated that you're speaking a little fast for translation, but
I will go slower.
But thank you very much.
In 1994, a freshly elected Member of Parliament, Stephen Harper, asked the Speaker of the House of Commons to rule out of order a budget bill because of its sweeping scope. It affected public sector pay, EI measures, payroll taxes, a reduction in federal spending through the Canada Assistance Plan, an extension of transportation subsidies, and the ability for the CBC to borrow money. At that time, Mr. Harper said, in quotes, "The subject matter of the bill is so diverse that a single vote on the content would put members in conflict with their own principles." That omnibus bill, ladies and gentlemen, was 21 pages. This omnibus bill is 308 pages. It amends 50 pieces of legislation on a diverse array of topics, many of which have zero to do with the federal budget of 2013. It makes a mockery of the process of public oversight. Consequently, and in keeping with the spirit that brought Mr. Harper and his Conservatives to power in 2006 and since, on a pledge of accountability and transparency, this committee should split Bill C4 into fiscal and non-fiscal measures in order to permit sufficient scrutiny of these incredibly important policy changes that are being proposed. Further, this committee should treat as separate and apart the non-fiscal measures that are major policy initiatives, which include the selection of Supreme Court justices or the fundamental changes proposed to the Canada Labour Code or the selection process for new economic immigrants who will build the Canada of our future. One simple way of accomplishing this proposal is to defeat these measures in C4 and invite the government to reintroduce these measures as separate pieces of legislation. This approach can also be used for matters that you view as time-sensitive, with such items put in a separate bill. The Parliamentary Budget Officer has queried why the federal government has underspent its budgetary allocations by $10 billion each year for the past 3 years. Yet, the second round of supplementaries, which parliamentarians are considering, are requesting $5.4 billion more to spend. The Finance Minister's Economic and Fiscal Update notes that the deficit is a surprising $7 billion smaller than forecast just a few months ago. It is hard not to feel that the public is being somehow gamed, that payments are suppressed in order to be able to declare great fiscal prudence, then picked up through supplementaries for which parliamentarians have even less time for scrutiny than this budget implementation bill. In 2013, the budget implementation bill was delayed because of prorogation. Supplementary budgets will have to be passed with even less than usual oversight, and there is no time to study a request for $5.4 billion. The integrity of the democratic process that assures there are checks and balances on the government's ability is at risk. Though the Stephen Harper of 1994 has silenced his concerns over these procedural slates of hand, he has inflamed that same ardor in many other people. In conclusion, the Supreme Court controversy that led to the measures in this bill did not even arise until after the budget was tabled. The budget is being used as a Trojan horse to rewrite the Canadian Labour Code and our immigration policies. These are not add-ons. They turn the workhorse of a budget implementation bill into a Trojan horse. And I fear that Bill C-4 is starting to look alarmingly like a Duffy budget bill, stuffed with hidden measures and designed to mislead the public. But it can and should be amended. Accountability and transparency were great principles in 2006. They're great principles in 2013 as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Yarnesian. Now, Madam Moreau from the CFIB.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening, and hello again to members of the committee. As many of you heard last week, CFIB is a not-for-profit, nonpartisan organization representing more than 109,000 small and medium-sized businesses across Canada who collectively employ more than 1.25 million Canadians and account for $75 billion, or nearly half of Canada's GDP. Our members represent all sectors of the economy and are found in every region of the country. Addressing issues of importance to them can have a widespread impact on job creation and the economy. You should have a slide presentation in front of you that I would like to walk you through in the next few minutes. CFIB's October Business Barometer on slide 2 shows that after a rough spring, small business optimism has trended into more positive territory so far this fall. The barometer showed a gain of a half point to 65% from September's reading, but it generally remains in line with the average value from the past 4 months. Full-time hiring plans are basically unchanged this month and typical for this time of year. We take this as a sign that business owners remain cautious. Only 41% of owners report a generally good state of business. The barometer has shown us that the economy is still a bit sluggish. To help us get through this sluggishness, we believe the government needs to address the issues of greatest concern to small business owners so that business owners can focus their attention on hiring staff, growing their business, thereby growing the economy. So what are those concerns? As you see on slide 3, the top issue of concern to small businesses is the total tax burden, which includes taxes from all levels of government. Another high priority issue is government debt and deficit. Small business owners understand the importance of paying down debt, and we have seen this issue grow in importance as the deficit itself has grown over the last few years. Employment insurance is a high priority issue for over half our members, for reasons of which I will get to in the next few slides. As the previous slide has demonstrated, one of the top issues of concern to small business owners is their total tax burden. There's only one taxpayer, and they pay taxes to all levels of government. With so many taxes, it's important to understand which ones have the biggest impact on the growth of their business. As you can see on slide 4, payroll taxes have by far the greatest impact on growth. Why? Because they're effectively a tax on jobs. They must be paid regardless of whether the business has posted any profit that month. Since EI is a payroll tax that can have a big impact on hiring decisions, our members have told us repeatedly how much the EI hiring credit has helped them maintain their workforce, especially during uncertain economic times. As you see on slide 5, 64% of our members indicated that the EI hiring credit would help their business. The stability of the EI rate is just as important to our members. 85% of our members indicated that a steady and predictable EI rate is critical for small business to help keep their businesses afloat during unstable economic times, and in turn help them grow their business as the economy improves. Even a few years after the recession started in 2008, as you'll see on slide 6, over half our members were in support of the EI hiring credit. The EI hiring credit has given those small businesses who received it a break from payroll taxes, this particular tax being EI. The hiring credit also allows small business owners to keep their employees, increase wages, and hire when they might otherwise not have been able to. On slide 7, our research from 2011 shows that the rapid rise in premiums prior to the EI rate freeze would have resulted in the fund coming into balance in 2017. We see from the government's recent economic update that the fund will be in surplus prior to this time. While the recent rate freeze announcement has provided some predictability to the rate-setting process, which our members welcomed, we do recommend that the 7-year break-even rate, or the 7-year rate-setting process begin as early as possible. CFIB recommends a fixed-rate approach as it provides the most stability in premium rates, which is a very important factor for small firms in their business planning. To conclude, CFIB supports the EI hiring credit and its expansion. It has given small business some measure of security during uncertain economic times. Secondly, rate stability is a critical component of a well-managed EI program. The current projections indicate that we are close to the break-even rate and that the EI account will be in surplus in 2016. We suggest the government reduce rates as soon as the EI account is in balance and do not let surpluses accumulate. Lastly, CFIB encourages the government to maintain a separate, independent EI account. Transparency and accountability to the taxpayer are key to creating business confidence in the EI system. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madame Moreau. And we'll now hear from Imagine Canada, Madame Gauthier.
Merci, Monsieur Bryce.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson, and I'd like to thank the committee for inviting us here this evening. When I appeared before you to present the point of view of Imagine Canada during the pre-budgetary consultations, I suggested that we need to change the way we think about the contribution of the charitable sector in Canada and around the world. Charitable organizations employ 2 million Canadians. They represent more than 7% of our GDP and are fed by the work of 13 million volunteers. We create jobs, we stimulate economic growth, and 9 Canadians out of 10 believe that charitable organizations too are essential to our quality of life. And it's from that perspective that we want to talk about one aspect of Bill C-4, and that is the improvements to and the prolongation of the hiring credit for small business.
The hiring credit for small business would provide a rebate of up to $1,000 to eligible employers whose EI contributions increase from one year to the next. Despite the name of this initiative, this provision is available to all small employers, including those in the nonprofit sector. This initiative is most welcome and yet reinforces my point about changing our mindset. When the credit was announced in the 2011 federal budget, giving its labeling, charities unfortunately did not take note immediately. It was only when Imagine Canada made inquiries months later that we learned, albeit happily, that it applied to our sector as well. We appreciate that the credit was designed and implemented without discriminating between for-profit and not-for-profit employers. Greater clarity, however, about its applicability to our sector would have enabled the government to recognize more publicly its support for charities and nonprofits' roles as employers. In a climate where every dollar counts, greater clarity would also have enabled organizations to make payroll decisions with the immediate knowledge that the credit applied to them. For policies aimed at promoting jobs and growth to achieve their full potential, we need to make sure not only that they are inclusive, as was done in this case and most appreciated, but also that they're described and marketed accordingly. Using the most recent information available to us on staffing and payroll costs, we've assessed the potential impact of the renewed and extended hiring credit for charities. Based on the level of employer contributions paid in 2011, we estimate that almost 40,000 charities could benefit from the hiring credit included in Bill C-4. This represents almost 90% of all the charities that have paid staff. That's 40,000 charities in every community in Canada that will find it a little easier to meet their payroll obligations if they, for example, turn a part-time job into a full-time job, take on new staff, or provide staff increases. While this is not a magic bullet for charities, it does suggest how government can, through instruments at its disposal and programs already in place, add another plank to its support for charities as engines of economic and social prosperity. In addition, charities will continue to pursue earned income activities and access to grants and contributions, and to depend on the generosity of Canadians, supported by the federal government through tax incentives such as the new super credit and the proposed stretch tax credit. We encourage the government to extend the sector-neutral approach taken with the hiring credit to other policies aimed at job creation and economic growth. As I explained in my recent testimony, there are numerous federal initiatives that could help charities expand their earned income activities, and thus their financial sustainability and their ability to create jobs. We look forward to working together to ensure that federal programs such as the MyTax Accelerate program, the Business Development Bank, the Communities Futures programs, and the Industrial Research Assistant program, to name just a few, could assist charities as employers and social entrepreneurs, and that they be fully and unambiguously open to them. Addressing this issue across all of government programs would further reinforce the positive support provided via the hiring credit in Bill C-4. Monsieur le Président,
l'appui positif que ce crédit.
Chair, good people who do good things here in Canada and elsewhere in the world are a very important element in the history of charitable organizations. But there's much more to us than just that. We create jobs everywhere across the country. We create economic activity and possibilities. We have an immense and positive impact on the quality of life. We are building a better Canada, and we are working with Canadians, the private sector and governments at every level to achieve that. Thank you for this initiative, which is a step in the right direction to help all charitable organizations. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Gauthier.
We'll now continue with Marie-Hélène Arruda, please. Yes, good evening. Can you hear me? Yes, I can hear you. Perfect. I'd like to begin by thanking you for the invitation. I'm going to focus on employment insurance. That's the topic at hand. This legislation has a lot, obviously, to do with getting rid of the office. It was created several years ago for Labor, and the purpose of it was to manage employment insurance funds. And as you're all aware, the fund was pillaged to the tune of $60 billion. The purpose of the office was to set aside a reserve of $2 billion. It would be set aside if the legislation were to be enacted, and the funds would come from the government's Consolidated Revenue Fund. By saving this office, the reserve of funds would also go by the wayside. And this fund, in a time of economic slowdown, would have helped to keep things afloat with respect to employment insurance. So in the case of an economic slowdown, things will be more difficult. And I think that the contribution rate is set at 0.05%. And so now the system under this legislation will not be helpful when it comes to an economic slowdown. I think that there needs to be criteria should the contributions rise. And the act of abolishing the office would limit the funds, and this signifies that any enhancement to the system would in fact fall by the wayside. And in any event, the current system doesn't adequately protect the unemployed. So the notion of improving the system, it really is no longer possible to improve the system because of the setting of the contribution rate. I'll just skip the part that I intended to bring up just then. A number of stakeholders talked about the employment credit that would improve the employment insurance fund in some respects. The purpose of the initiative was to promote hiring, to promote employment. In our opinion, this objective really wasn't borne out through this initiative. Of course, it would have an effect on fees for employers, but it actually jeopardized employment insurance. And the initiative was, in a sense, a way of taking the responsibility away from employers when it came to dealing with unemployment. Now, perhaps that's a good thing for some people, but we believe that the bill doesn't achieve the ends that we would desire. We don't want any protection to be reduced, and what is proposed under the bill certainly will not improve or enhance protection for the unemployed. That's basically what I wanted to say. Thank you, Ms. Arruda. We'll now start with members' questions. Mr. Caron. Ms. Arruda, thank you very much for your presentation. I have two specific questions to ask you. The first question is in relation to the office. This office was intended to set contribution rates. And, of course, I wasn't here before it was dispensed with. Whether it come from employers or employees, on both sides, it's clear that contributions were paid by employers and employees, and the government didn't put a cent into this. And what we've heard from Minister Flaherty is basically more of the same. How, in your opinion, can the government justify closing the office when it was supposed to pay an arm's length role and an independent role, and not as opposed to the government that would otherwise set contributions? Well, I think that the office was created in a sense to quieten the misgivings of workers when it came to the pillaging of the fund. And I think at the outset the office was in theory intended to respond to the needs and the expectations of workers. As I said, the government never really made a solid contribution. Now, the office was perhaps temporarily created to address a crisis. There was a scandal of misappropriating of funds, and now that that's over, perhaps the office no longer serves a purpose. Well, yes, of course, it is to set contributions or premiums. We've just spoken with the Minister of Finance, and there is a problem. The Minister said that employment insurance belongs to those who are unfortunate enough to lose their jobs, not those that want to make an ongoing income from it. Now, what about seasonal employees? In 45 seconds, could you address the issue of seasonal employees? Well, I think that nobody wants to be jobless. Seasonal workers, it's not their fault. It's a lifestyle, and nobody really wants to work for 55% of their wage. It's not generous, and I think that's an erroneous notion. I don't think that anybody voluntarily wants to be on employment insurance. It's intended to help people out during bad periods, difficult periods in their lives, and it helps them to survive. Well, there are a number of regions that rely on the seasonal employees, for example, forestry, the fisheries, etc. Ms. Yang Ying, as Minister Flaherty appeared just before you, and I asked questions regarding provisions concerning occupational health and safety. They are in clauses 17 and 18 of Part 3, and asked him why were they in the budget. He said, well, the government wanted to create accountability. Now, if we follow that logic right through to the end, anything could be an expenditure, and the government at the end of the day might end up having a Budget Implementation Act every session, and that would be an omnibus bill, and they could basically shove all their legislation into that legislation.
As I pointed out, our Prime Minister, when he was just a Member of Parliament, is if you throw too many things in one bucket, you can't really take a look at the different measures, some of which are fundamental policy initiatives. And I mentioned 3 of them. I mentioned over 60 amendments to the Canada Labour Code, a brand new way of bringing in economic immigrants, and the choice of Supreme Court justices. And the Supreme Court justice controversy erupted after the budget was tabled, so this was not an add-on to a Budget Implementation Act. It's just like, whatever, let's just throw things in. We know that this is the opposite of what we were promised we were going to get with this fresh Harper government approach. This was exactly what they railed against with the omnibus bills of the Liberals, and we just got more and in spades in the last few budgets.
Thank you. Merci, Mr. Caron. We'll go to Mr. Kelly, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have to just go back to Ms. Yaunazan. Pardon me?
Yaunazan.
Yaunazan. On your comments, and just a specific one, I just have one question for you. On fishermen's EI in the last budget, there was a mistake made, quite frankly, where fishing hours and non-fishing hours became separated. And when someone applied for EI, they weren't able to get their fishing hours and their non-fishing hours lumped together, and quite frankly lost EI benefits because of that. We correct that in this budget. The minister has recognized that was a mistake. It'll be retroactive back to April 1st of 2013. Do you support that change?
I support any government that recognizes its mistakes and corrects them. And I think there is room for this budget to do what every budget has done, because you wouldn't be the first government that had made a mistake in drafting that got discovered often through the process of scrutiny in clause by clause, sometimes through the chamber of sober second thought, and sometimes not until things were implemented. And so there is always room for technical changes.
Thank you. So I'm going to take that as a yes on that one issue, at least. The to the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, Ms. Moreau, you talk about the government's support for small business. One of the things that you, and I realize all of our witnesses are limited to time here, one of the things that you didn't get a chance to discuss was the reduction of the small business tax rate from 12% to 11%, and the increase in the amount of income that a small business can make and still be eligible for the small business tax rate. there's a tremendous benefit to any small business in being able to increase the amount eligible from $300,000 to $500,000. That's another $200,000 worth of income. Have you done any in-depth studies through your group to see how big of a benefit that will be for small business?
On that particular segment, I don't have those figures with me, but I believe I promised them to the chair last week as well, so we are certainly looking into whether we can provide that. The reduction of the small business tax rate is an important component of reducing the overall tax burden for small businesses, and we are asking that the government consider for its next budget reducing that tax even further.
To Madam Gauthier, on the same issue, have you had a chance to do any in-depth studies and take a look at that as well?
And this is with regards, could you clarify?
To lowering the small business tax rate and actually increasing the amount of money a small business can make and still be qualified as a small business.
Right. Certainly in terms of the charities, given their different status through the CRA, the applicability on that particular provision may be different from that of other small businesses in terms of them being tax exempt. But I'm happy to take that question back to our chief economist and to provide you any additional information we'd have.
Yeah. One of the other questions that came up, and again, it's related to small business, and that's the lifetime capital gains exemption. In my part of the world, in rural Nova Scotia, there's a big agriculture community, huge fishery, and certainly a big forestry community. Without that, quite frankly, there would be very little intergenerational transfer of those businesses between family members. It just wouldn't occur because the owner of the business would have to sell off most of the assets in order to pay the capital gains. So do you could you remark on that and the benefit of that to small business?
Just a brief comment.
The extension of the lifetime capital gains threshold has been an important component of succession planning for our small business members, and especially the indexation to inflation, which keeps it current.
Thank you, Mr. Keddy. We'll go to Mr. Bryson, please, for your round.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to each of you, and thank you for your presentations today. First question to Madam Moreau from the CFIB. Towards the end of your presentation, you said that you would support the reduction of EI premiums once the account is in balance. The recent economic statement or fiscal update from the minister has said that the account will be in balance in 2015. And the minister's projections up until 2017 show that by freezing the EI rate at $1.88 for every $100 of insurable income, or earnings rather, that there will be an additional $5.6 billion collected until the end of 2016. Just to be clear, are you calling for the EI premiums to be reduced after the account is in balance in 2015 as opposed to the government collecting an additional $5.6 billion on workers and employers?
We are certainly in favor of ensuring that the account doesn't accumulate too much of a surplus. These projections are projections for right now, so we'll see what happens in 2015, 2016, 2017, whenever that may be. But we're not in favor of the account generating enormous surpluses. The way it's structured now, with a 7-year break-even rate, as I understand it, should be that there's no need for the account to generate surpluses to protect from...
Yeah. So when you're saying that you support the freeze, you do not mean freezing it at unnecessarily high rates. You don't want it to go higher, but you would support it going down to reflect the fact that it's gone into balance.
We always like to go to our members, as you know, on issues like this, but I can say that for for what we know to date, that stability of the rate is a critical component.
Yeah.
So knowing from year to year and for 7 years at a time what the rate will
Sure.
be is an important measure for our members.
Thank you very much. Ms. Yanisian, nice to see you again. Always nice to see you at committee. Your organization have been active on the whole issue of income inequality, but also growing inequality of opportunity. A budget and budget implementation acts provide us with the opportunity to consider measures that would address inequality. And one of the measures that has been presented to this committee numerous occasions by organizations has been the conversion of the currently non-refundable tax credits introduced in recent budgets to refundable tax credits. Would you like to comment on that and what the effect would be on low and middle income Canadians?
Anytime you take a non-refundable tax credit and turn it into something refundable, it means you extend the reach of the benefit of whatever the government envisioned to offer people. So clearly, by offering more cash to people further down the income spectrum, you have an opportunity to close that gap. But may I say that by simply proliferating tax credits has occurred in a number of the past few budgets, and converting some of those tax credits, extending them to people that might be able to take advantage of them, though, the lower your income is, a lot of these tax credits are dependent on being able to have enough surplus income to be able to put your child into sports or arts or do a lot of the things that are, or fitness, which are very difficult, very challenging for families to do. The refundability of the tax credit isn't the critical thing. It's finding ways of actually helping all children get opportunities every day of their lives.
30 seconds.
With the same public policy objective of addressing inequality, would a significant increase to the working income tax benefit achieve a great deal for low-income families?
It's all in the design, but I would think that the working income tax benefit is not unlike a wage supplement, and for a government and for many analysts who wish to see the labor market functioning without supports from the government, it would be actually better to make sure that you are not actively intervening in market forces, for example, actually pouring hundreds of thousands of temporary foreign workers into the bottom end of the wage pool, therefore actually suppressing wage growth at the bottom end, while we're talking about all these great things we can do through enhanced WITB and actively working against the way the market itself would raise wages. It seems to me kind of working at cross purposes, over intervention from a governmental point of view.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bryson. We're going to go to Mr. Adler, please.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you, all the witnesses, for being here today. Ms. Moreau, could you please comment on the importance of having predictability and stability of EI premiums for small business?
Certainly. The importance of rate setting can't be overestimated for small business owners. Knowing how much they're going to be paying in payroll taxes for year to year is a critical component of their business planning and a really important component of the EI program as a whole.
And the EI hiring tax credit has been a success with your members?
Yes, very much so. You'll see we've got data that supports it loud and clear. Many of our members appreciated the simplicity of the credit, that they don't have to apply for it. It just comes when they qualify for it. CRA does the calculation and it comes to their account directly. That's an important component of reducing red tape and paper burden regulation for small business owners who are often hit the hardest. So it's been a big boon to our membership for sure.
Okay, and I'm seeing like high priority issues in the survey of your members. Total tax burden rates number one by far. And so lowering corporate tax rates to 15%, small business tax rates to 11%. That's been welcomed by your members and have been critical in job creation. Is that correct?
Certainly. Low tax rates, from our perspective, are a critical component, as you said. We are interested in examining that further as the economy starts to pick up slowly and as the government reduces its deficit, that they look at lowering the small business tax rate even further.
And how welcome was the news earlier last week that the finance minister will not only be balancing the budget by 2015-16, but in fact will 14-15, but 15-16 rather, but in fact will have a surplus. Is that welcome news by you and your members?
Our membership tend to be fiscal hawks. They can't afford to carry deficits themselves, so they have a hard time when the government does it. And returning to balance the budget will be welcomed by then at that time.
Okay. How much time do I have left, Chair?
3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Yelnazian? Yelnazian. Sorry. What's the mandate of the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives?
We were established in 1980 to provide research analysis, and we're funded by 12,000 individual and organizational members today to do the same thing that we've always done, economic, social justice.
Is all your funding from individuals, or do you receive anything from organizations?
We do get individual and organizational support, always have, and God bless them, hopefully we always will.
Do you receive any foreign funding?
I cannot tell you. I don't know if any of our individual members are foreign established people. I don't know.
No, I'm not talking about individual members. I'm talking about organizations.
Not that I know of, sir, but I'm not the executive director, and I don't cover the finances. I'm a researcher.
Do you receive any funding from foreign governments?
From foreign governments?
Yes.
Not to the best of my knowledge, no.
No? Okay. Does your organization comment on foreign affairs also, and Canada's position on foreign affairs?
We have a trade research kind of a wing of the organization. We have had a trade research organization.
I know I give members a lot of leeway in terms of relevance, but we are discussing the Budget Implementation Act, so if we can pull it back to that.
Credibility of the organization presenting is important too.
We are here discussing the budget bill, so.
I know, but it's important to determine the credibility of witnesses too that are appearing before.
Well, order on this. The witnesses are asked to appear here. They're guests of all the committee and especially of the chair, so we shall treat them as such.
How much time do I have left?
You have about a minute.
Okay. So, as far as you're concerned, then, lowering corporate taxes, what we have them set now at 15%, is a bad thing. You would advocate increasing them. Is that correct?
I don't think I have necessarily said that, though I have said in the past personally, and I can't speak for all of my colleagues because we have diversity of opinion in our organization. But I have said personally that.
Are you here speaking on your own behalf, or on the behalf of the Canadian Centre for Policy
I am here on behalf of the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, but no individual carries the entire voice because as a think tank we do actually have diversity of opinion.
Okay, no, I understand that. But so you're here speaking on behalf of the Centre for Policy Alternatives.
To the best of my ability, yes.
But you cannot give the position of the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives.
I think most of the people that are associated with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives would think that further reductions in corporate taxes are not.
Further reductions, current levels of corporate taxation.
Okay, last question. Brief response, please.
The last question being, would I be for or against an increase?
Yes.
In corporate taxation? Personally, yes.
Not personally.
Corporately,
does the
yes.
Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives stand for an increase in the
Personally,
current
yes,
corporate tax?
sir. Personally, yes, and
Please
corporately,
answer my
yes.
question.
I just did twice
No,
now.
you didn't. You answered it for yourself. I'm asking for the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, which you are appearing
I said
here.
personally, yes, and corporately, yes. And that's the third time I'm saying the same thing now, sir.
You haven't answered it once. Thank you. Chair.
Do you not understand the term corporate, sir? As on behalf of my organization and on behalf of myself.
Excuse me, witness. You don't have to be insulted.
Okay,
You're here
order.
I'm not.
I'm trying to get a correct answer.
I'm trying to answer your question.
I'm trying to get an answer from you.
Mr. Adler.
And as a witness,
I've offered you an answer 3 times.
Mr. Adler, I heard yes, both personally, and yes for the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that is correct. Thank you. All right. Monsieur Côté, s'il vous plaît.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chair, let's come back down to earth. Ms. Arruda, I really enjoyed listening to your presentation, and of course it reminded me of when I came out of university in the 90s. For 3 years, I had small contracts. I also received welfare, and I got a pittance per month. And unfortunately, the housing in Limoilou cost, or fortunately, housing cost half of what it does now. And I did receive welfare at that time, or employment insurance. Now, when you are in that kind of cycle, jobless, and I just want to give you a bit of background. In Quebec at the time, the unemployment rate was from about 10 to 12%, so radically different to today's context. It was really difficult to make ends meet. There's, of course, one's income, and of course, and also expenses, housing, travel expenses, food, clothing. As far as the radical changes that have been made to employment insurance over a number of years, and it wasn't just a Conservative government that played a major role in that, do you believe that the trap that ensnares people who are jobless, who get employment insurance, do you think that it in fact is counterproductive, that it doesn't actually serve them at the end of the day? Well, yes, I agree with you. When you receive unemployment insurance, it means that you are unemployed. It's tough, psychologically speaking. So when a person loses his or her job, they lose their routine, and all of a sudden they may find themselves ineligible for benefits. And if they can't navigate the system, well, as if that wasn't hard enough, sometimes they're told that, there are new rules. Maybe you need to accept a lower paying job, and at the end of the day their financial situation might be worse than it was initially, and that's what the legislation is forcing people to do. It forces them to look for jobs that are not as high paying, that aren't in their fields. So it's really shocking that people who are unemployed don't even want to apply for an employment insurance because they're desperate to find a job immediately. They don't want to be suddenly in a category of people who are disadvantaged by the system, especially given the criteria and the effects of the new reform. So I don't know if I've answered your question.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. I have an additional question. This is something that I'm not sure if I've seen in the news in Quebec or elsewhere in Quebec, but something that was talked about quite a bit in New Brunswick was the need to fill out a form and to have that form filled out by potential employers. Have we seen this phenomenon in certain regions of Quebec? Oh, I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell you, but no, I'm not sure. No, that's all right. Thank you. Thank you very much for being so honest. I have 1 minute left. Oh, well, that's good news. All right. I will now turn my attention to Ms. Moreau. Very quickly, there's something that I found intriguing in your documents at page 4 on slide number 7 concerning EI premiums. And I've already asked a question to Finance Department officials on this issue. So we have a new fund since 2009. Why did you not talk about the $57 billion that were accumulated and which unfortunately have disappeared from the public, or been lost into public accounts? Well, I can tell you that our members had many concerns about this subject. given that we're talking about Bill C4 today, we limited our comments to that bill. But I can tell you that this was a concern for many of our members. So this was a bad surprise. Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Van Kesteren.
Thank you all for appearing. And Ms. Aruda, we're going to have to speak through an interpreter. I apologize. You wouldn't want to hear me try to address you in French. I just want to commend you in your organization. I think it's a wonderful initiative to advocate for those that are less fortunate. And I think in society that in a civilized country, the unemployed are something that I think touches us all very, very close. And we all, I think, maybe if you just agree with me, the biggest right, because you advocate for the rights of the unemployed, the biggest right, wouldn't you agree, is a job.
Excusez-moi, est-ce que la question...
Was the question to me?
Oui, j'ai un petit problème avec la traduction, donc...
Yeah, I'm sorry, I had some issues with the interpretation, but yes, the basic right here is a job. In answer to your question, no, I think that the most important right is the right to live, the right to have income support. So if income comes from a job, that's fantastic, but life isn't always like that. And the problem is that unemployment doesn't necessarily depend on what a person wants. When you lose a job, what do? Well, everybody should have a job, yes, but look, there's a problem because there aren't enough jobs for everyone. There's always a basic unemployment rate.
But I think we're saying the same thing. You would agree that the reason you're here is to advocate for those that are unemployed. And if they, well, let me rephrase that. If they had a job, I guess you'd be out of a job. Okay. So I think that I just wonder if you would agree. I would hope that we have, as you know, our government has had and will continue to use a tax credit to provide, to encourage businesses to create work. Would you agree that is a good measure?
Moi, non.
No, because for us, this is a way to take away responsibility, if you will, from businesses, their responsibility when it comes to dealing with the issue of unemployment. So no, this is less money that will go into the pockets of the unemployed. And we aren't sure that this is going to create permanent jobs, that this measure will create permanent jobs.
Let me ask you this. What about tax relief on Canadian families?
What?
Is that a good initiative to help businesses lower taxes so that they're not burdened with those things, and so that they can maybe direct some of those funds to hire new people? Would you agree maybe that's a good policy?
Not especially, no.
Miss Moreau, thank you. You're a very charming lady, and I think. Miss Moreau, we had some witnesses in the other day. How much time do I have, Chair?
You have about 1 minute.
All right, I'm going to ask you something else. I want to ask you this. We've talked about all the good things we've done. As the CFIB, where do you think we should go from here? We're lowering taxes. We're trying to make it easier to conduct business. Where does the CFIB feel we should go from here as a government? What do you recommend?
We're in the throes of preparing our submissions to next year's budget, which will be substantial, I can assure you, and I look forward to an opportunity to meet with you on that.
You can't give us some
certainly, yeah. Our top three, if you will, is to lower the small business tax rate, to not increase payroll taxes, specifically the CPP, and to consider looking at reducing the government's deficit through the public sector pension and public sector benefits situation that we are facing right now.
Okay. Thank you. I'm done, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Van Kesteren. Mr. Rankin, please.
Well, thank you. Thank you, all the witnesses. I think my time will only allow me to ask questions of Ms. Yalandizian and Ms. Moreau. And I just, first of all, want to say the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives is an organization I've proudly contributed to for over a decade, and I salute the great work that you do. I have to say, though, that I'm grateful to you for coming here and putting in context what we are doing as a committee. You'll be happy to know that you're in good company, that radical organization, the Chartered Professional Accountants of Canada today also pointed out the inadequate time available to study such a complicated bill. And I'm grateful to you for pointing out that Stephen Harper railed against a 21-page omnibus bill, and today we have to deal with a 308-page bill. This is the 5th hour. We will be here 5 hours today to do it, as the government prorogued and took another month away from the scrutiny. So your points are very well taken. I asked the Minister of Finance just what amendments to the health and safety provisions of the Canada Labour Code had to do with a finance bill, and he said something like, well, mediators and the like have to take into account financial issues. But I thought your example of the Supreme Court amendments were an example where really I can't think of anything financial, but they threw that into the omnibus bill as well. So thank you for bringing to the Canadian public's attention what I call legislation by exhaustion and the inadequate way to address these issues. But on a more substantive, not process side, you talk about the underspending each year. And you talked about how that the deficit looks smaller, and you used a provocative expression. You say it may be that the public is being gamed. I wonder if you could explain what you meant by that.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Rankin. It's very difficult to know what is going on. The Parliamentary Budget Officer has asked for documentation and failed to receive it. The public is asking and fails to receive good answers to many questions that are being posed of this government. And that $10 billion shortfall consistently in 3 years, underspending by $10 billion every year, kind of looks like, well, maybe they want to be telling us a story because the money appears in supplementaries a few months later. So it appears to me that there is a pattern. And the pattern is not, does not offer us a lot of reassurance that they want to be open and forthcoming in how the budget is being both articulated and then allocated and spent. I guess some parliamentarians believe government is better when it's closed and murky than open and transparent.
Right, I fear you're right. I'd like to ask Ms. Moreau a question, but before doing so, my question is about how you characterize what the minister today called the contributory plan, the Canada Pension Plan, which you refer to on your slides as a payroll tax. I referenced slide 4 of your presentation. First of all, the context is that today the Canadian Association of Retired Persons released a survey of Canadian voters produced by the Forum poll that showed a majority want the CPP contributions increased, 53%, and that half of Canadians agree that the CPP's target of replacing about 25% of pre-retirement income is too low. So my question, I suppose, is if Mr. Flaherty acknowledges that this is a contributory plan, and since a tax is something that goes to the Consolidated Revenue Fund, why is this a payroll tax, or is that just a convenient shorthand that you're using?
For many of our members, anything that taxes their ability to hire a new employee or to increase their wages is determined to be a tax. So we understand their technicalities, but for the employer who never receives any of the income back, it's not deferred income like it is for the employee. So as a result of that, we call it a tax for that reason.
But a license is also an expense that doesn't turn on profits. You have to pay business licenses and so forth. You're not complaining about that being a payroll tax, I don't think, are you?
It's easy to see specifically who the license goes to. We don't complain about licenses as tax, but we do complain about them as If they're too expensive or if they are cost of doing business that is prohibitive, then we do, I can assure you.
Yeah, I just have a hard time with your calling something a tax, which I think even the minister has just acknowledged is not. But you say that the economy is still sluggish, and therefore we cannot afford to do what most Canadians, according to today's poll, tell us we should be doing and help people save for their retirement. So just when is it going to be possible to do what you think we should do? When is the economy going to be ready? What state of economy is necessary before you go along with it?
I think we're looking for a robust, healthy economy. We're
2% growth, 5%?
Okay, let's just have her answer.
I'm not an economist, so I won't pick the number, and that's typically not where CFIB lands itself. But we are interested in raising retirement income for Canadians. We just think there are other options available than doing it through employers through a tax.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. We're going to go to Mr. Jean, please, for your round.
Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses that appeared today. Small businesses are defined as those that employ 5 to 100 persons. And, looking at some of the stats of small businesses, and, of course, you, Ms. Moreau, your organization represents 109,000 of them, but that doesn't make up all the small businesses. There's actually 1.1 million small businesses, so you represent about 10% of the small businesses. And in fact, they employ 48.3% of Canada's workforce. Over 5.1 million Canadians work for small businesses. Mm-hmm. And 86% of Canadian exporters were small businesses. 42% of Canada's private sector GDP is from small businesses. 28% of the country's total GDP came from businesses that employ under 50 people. I'm so excited I can't even say small businesses. Wouldn't you say that small businesses have a significant impact on our economy? It's a stunning impact.
There's no question. Based on the statistics that you just read, and we have our own that are very similar, there's no question that we believe small businesses underpin the Canadian economy, essentially.
Without them, our economy would be in tatters.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think we have to agree.
So what did expanding and extending the small business hiring credit for small businesses do to our economy? Because that hit 50% of Canadians, in essence.
It did. It allowed small business owners essentially to receive a bit of a break during a time when the economy wasn't doing very well and they were just trying to get out of the recession. We have research that shows small business owners in times of economic distress are the first to hire, the last to fire. We had many of our members who didn't pay themselves during the recession in order to keep their employees, and giving them the EI hiring credit allowed them to keep those employees or to keep up with inflation and give small increases in their salaries and to maintain the workforce they had.
I was even shocked, I can't remember where I saw, but I was shocked to see that the average wage for small business owners was $38,000.
And for many of our members, I know there's this conception that the small business owners are hiding money under the mattresses, and that's why they're not providing pensions for their employees, or that they're not providing wages, they're not hiring. As you said, many small business owners are receiving very small salaries. The margins on a small grocery store, for example, can be very low, 1% to 2%.
In fact, I think I read somewhere that just 5 years ago we had a record for small businesses closing, 109,000 as a result of the economic downturn. Something like that, I can't remember, but that would put a lot of people out of work, and in fact many people that are small business owners would not receive a salary as a result of effort and money they put into that business. Is that fair to say?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. So this, the expansion and extension of the hiring credit, what else have you heard from your members in relation to it?
Well, we have, our own research shows that they've been thrilled. It's, as I was saying earlier, it's a low cost. They didn't have to apply for it. There's no red tape associated with it. The CRA just did the calculation, and they receive it when they qualified. And we can't think of a better way to implement a tax measure such as the EI hiring credit than doing it that way, where it's very easy, and business owners don't have to worry about whether or not they need to apply for it.
And it doesn't go to any particular large corporation. It goes to everybody, just about spread right across the economy, all across every province. And
certainly not, and CFIB lobbied hard for the credit, but it applies to all small business owners, whether they're members of ours or not. So.
Is there any other innovative ways that you can suggest that this government could reduce debt and at the same time grow the economy by creating jobs?
Tax credits like the small business hiring credit is a great example. We're looking at a variety of different measures through training, through reducing the deficit and bringing public sector wages in line with the private sector. There are a number of issues that we'll be hoping to present to members of Parliament as we proceed through the Budget 2014 process.
Do you find that during the consultation process the Department has worked very well with you, taking your suggestions and given it due consideration?
We have an excellent relationship with the Department of Finance. We've been quite pleased to be working closely with them over the years.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jean. Mr. Caron, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup. Je vais revenir avec Madame Arruda.
Thank you, Ed. I'll go back to Ms. Arruda. Your government helps people without a job. Now, often these are people who've recently lost their job who come to you so that you can help them. I think we agree that the closure of the EI office that had closed is a major issue. And we talked about the loss of the pilot project and the 5 additional weeks of funding for people who live in areas with high unemployment levels. Given your experience and given everything that we've seen with this legislation, with the pilot projects and the changes that are going to be present in this bill, if we look at the quota systems, if we look at the elimination of the arbitrators, with the fact that organizations like yours cannot officially represent the unemployed anymore in front of the tribunal, well, in your experience, what's your opinion of all the reforms that have taken place so far for those who are the most vulnerable? Well, it's a sure thing. We're going to see, well, we'll be offering much less aid. If you look at the loss of the arbitrator councils, the new process is much more complicated. That's going to discourage many people. Many unemployed people will not take advantage of their right to an appeal because it'll take too long because there's administrative delays. So these people are going to lose aid that they might otherwise have been able to get. Certain other financing will no longer be offered. Lots of people will be excluded under the new criteria. And I think there will be a surplus in EI given all these changes, but certainly less money will be given out. That's going to have a direct effect on the unemployed. The unemployed are going to have even less help available to them. And so these things you mentioned, it's just the loss of this office. That's just one more nail in the coffin here, because that's going to affect many, many people who are unemployed, and that's really not to their advantage. Well, I'd imagine that in your situation, you've seen many people who are in very difficult situations, particularly given these reforms. Yes, absolutely. Well, things were already going badly, so now with these new reforms, access has just gotten even worse. It's become even more painful for many people. Moving back to Ms. Yanisian, you talked about the way that this government is abusing Parliament with its omnibus budgets that are 500 pages long, that deal with things that aren't budgetary measures. I think we should also take note of the fact that most committees within the government have decided to prevent independent members of Parliament from being able to make amendments. They're not here around the table, and they're not going to be able to make amendments anymore. Many committees have decided that independent members can't fully contribute. Now, they're now suggesting that independent members can present their amendments to committees, and because they'll be able to do it in committees, they'll no longer be able to do it in the House. Are you aware of these changes? What are your comments on this?
And I am grateful to be part of it. I am grateful to be part of these very respectful questions of small business and of the unemployed, and I'm sitting here thinking this piece of legislation needs to be split apart between fiscal measures and non-fiscal measures, and the parts that are non-fiscal, that are recreating huge pieces of public policy, with zero scrutiny, need to themselves be treated separate and apart. And there's absolutely no way this process, which is designed to introduce amendments, is going to deliver that sort of thing because of the nature of where we're at. And it really saddens me to watch our democratic institutions, which are here, to prevent this kind of railroading of public policy, to permit scrutiny and democratic discussion, being not permitted anymore. And we're in a democracy, and we have these tools at our disposal, and we can't do it. We're going to talk about small business and the unemployed. With due respect, that isn't what we're here to discuss. We're here to discuss a piece of legislation, a project for implementing a budget, our second budget implementation bill, that stuffs even more things that have got nothing to do with a budget in it, that can actually rewrite Canadian history when it comes to immigration, when it comes to selecting a Supreme Court justice, when it comes to defining what is health and safety of workers. That strikes me as like improbable that we are having this discussion about, you know, where should we go from here on small business taxes. That isn't what this bill is about.
Okay. Thank you. Merci. Mr. Caron. Mr. Hoback, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, ladies, for being here tonight. And I guess I'm just going to try to get some clarification on where your positions are on different things. And my first question is the hiring credit for small businesses. Do you think it will encourage job creation? Ms. Morrow?
Certainly, for many of our members.
Okay, I don't have a lot of time, and I got a lot of questions.
Okay.
So yes or no, I kind of know.
Yes, it will.
Okay. Ms. Yalnazi? I'm sorry if I pronounced your name wrong.
That's fine. Yalnazian.
I'll get it right by the end. Do you think it'll encourage the hiring credit for small business? Do you think it'll actually encourage job creation?
I think it is a help to those companies that were close to making that hiring decision anyway. I don't think that it is enough money to make somebody turn around and say, I think I'll hire that person.
Okay, so you think it should be more money? Okay, then.
No, I don't think it should be more money, sir. But thank you
so?
for filling in the rest of my sentence.
Oh, I didn't mean to do that. I just was asking, okay. Closing tax loopholes. Do you think we need to be doing this to keep the integrity of our tax system in place?
Right. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Ms. Yalnazian?
Closing tax loopholes is absolutely something that should be done, and I would add to that you should not keep opening up new tax loopholes at the same time.
EI rate freeze. I know, Ms. Monroe, you've been fairly consistent on that. The Policy Center, where do you guys stand on the EI rate freeze?
I would actually agree with the CFIB that having a 7-year timeline and knowing where those premiums are going to go and why they're going to go there is an absolutely appropriate way of doing things.
Okay, thank you. Lifetime capital gains exemption, the raising and then indexing it to inflation. Again, an important factor?
It's a critical component for those businesses who can take advantage of that arrangement for their succession planning. We're looking down the line. Succession planning is going to be a challenge for this country, and making sure we have people who can take over those businesses or that they can appoint family members or whoever that is willing to do it, take advantage of it. It's critical.
Would you agree?
I think lifetime capital gains exemption increases are lovely if you've already dealt with the problem of growing inequality, which you haven't.
Okay.
So I think that's like frosting on the cake if you've already solved the problem of income inequality, which is getting worse every year, and measures that are being proposed by this government for when we are in budget balance, which is income splitting and doubling the contributions to TFSA, will actually make income inequality worse in this country.
So all those as a negative thing then?
Well, they widen income inequality. If you don't see that as a negative thing, then we're not talking about positive, negative. We're just talking the facts.
I'm just trying to get your perspective, just so I have an understanding of what you represent. Electronic sales suppression software. That's the software that's coming forward.
Say that again, please.
Electronic sales suppression software. It's software that prevents, that actually allows the till to be split apart so the cash economy can take advantage or actually cheat out what they're supposed to be paying in taxes. That's part of this budget bill, and that's had a lot of favorable response. I can't see anybody being negative on that. And then phasing out the LSVCC, the Venture Capital Fund, that's in Quebec. Any comments on that?
Sorry, I missed LSV.
LSVCC. It's the venture capital play. It's basically it's the government's decision to phase out the credit. It's a credit they have in a tax credit they have that will be limited by 2017.
I have no
No
comment.
problem. Okay. Chair, I'll turn it back to you then.
I'm going to take the final round here as the chair. I just want to clarify for process. We are discussing the overall bill, but Part 3, I mean, this panel is largely focused on Part 3 of the bill, Division 1, which discusses employment insurance, EI hiring credit, EI premium rate, EI fishing regulations. So, I mean, all the questions with respect to the EI are completely germane to the division of the bill. I did want to address the larger part of process. I mean, we have the full briefing given by the Department of Finance is now online thanks to this committee's work. We're one of the committees that actually does everything online. We're a very open committee. You can in fact go to our website and see every single study or every single witness who's ever presented on any pre-budget thing. In terms of this bill itself, Part 1, measures related to the income tax. Part 2, the Excise Tax Act. Part 3, you've got employment insurance, financial institutions, 2 sections on that. It's true, you have the Canada Labour Code, you have reorganization of certain Crown corporations, again, the Financial Administration Act, Canada Pension Plan Investment Board Act. But I just like to take it back to the process. This is a second budget implementation act. The government presents the budget in February or March of each year, following up with one act in the spring, one act in the fall. But the start of this process is actually the pre-budget consultations at this committee. So, Ms. Yelnazan, I'm going to ask you questions I ask my political opponents, which is, we get submissions on every single topic at this committee every summer and fall. So if we don't want sections on environment or labor in the budget bills, and that's in the budget, do we as a finance committee say no to people who want to present on the environment, on labor, on immigration? Because frankly, as a committee, we take submissions at the pre-budget consultations on everything. We accept it on everything. The budget is obviously the largest document each year, and the budget acts implement that. So if we're not going to allow it at the Budget Implementation Act process, we should probably cut it out at the pre-budget consultation. And I'll tell you, if I did that as a chair, I wouldn't be a very popular person in this country. So can you respond to that?
Absolutely. I think you're completely correct to say that any pre-budget consultation should be open game to discuss anything that the people of Canada want to see in the next federal budget. And that is appropriate. But when you put in a 308-page document with, I think it's over 420 clauses, and you give witnesses, I think it's 7 hours to bring testimony before you, for this committee to consider, how is it going to amend the Canada Labour Code? Why don't you just why doesn't the government of Canada say, we heard this in the budget, in the pre-budget consultations. We agree that it is important to change the Canada Labour Code, and we're going to do that in a separate piece of legislation. Same with choosing the justice for the Supreme Court. Same with changing immigration. These are major planks of public policy in our country. Why are they being shoved in a piece of legislation where there is absolutely no ability to scrutinize in a clause-by-clause way and reasonably make amendments to these important policy initiatives?
Well, we'll be doing clause-by-clause later this week. I mean,
you're not going to amend individual. You're going to.
Well, it's up to the committee. I'm not going to prejudge.
No, it's true. And what I did.
In fact, I don't even get a vote unless there's a tie as a chair. So.
But what
anyways, this is part of an ongoing process debate, but. It all originates in the pre-budget consultations, which is frankly a catch-all for any sort of policy whatsoever. So
true,
I think if we're going to cut it out of the later budget process, we ought to be consistent along the entire pre-budget process.
You are asking Canadians for their opinions on what should be in a budget, and you can use that as a sounding board to be able to say, these things are financial, these things are fiscal, these things are budgetary, these things are not. We need to treat them differently at different committees.
I'm not convincing you, but I do want to go to Ms. Gauthier just very briefly. You talk about, in your opening statement, you say, based on the level of employer contributions paid in 2011, we estimate that almost 40,000 charities could benefit from the hiring credit included in this Budget Implementation Act. That's almost 90% of all charities have paid staff. But you did say that when the hiring credit came out, many charities did not avail themselves of it because they did not see it as applying to them. Was that because they didn't see themselves as traditional employers in that way, or was it something that the government did or did not do that charities did not avail themselves of the credit immediately.
Right. It wasn't so much that the charities at the end of that period didn't avail themselves of the credit. It was that they were not immediately aware on budget night in the months following that it was applicable to them. And the point was simply that in terms of the way that we described the credit, we in fact, we acknowledge our mistake. We overlooked it. And in talking with officials and I believe with our colleagues in government, they didn't promote it or market it as something that they were in fact doing for charity. So we would welcome the opportunity when additional initiatives that apply to all employers are put forth to have them identified as such clearly. And I think the language in the budget document spoke to in recognition of the important role that small businesses play as job creators in the Canadian economy. And I would simply welcome the inclusion in those types of sentences of and charities and nonprofits.
But when you see the phrases employers, small business, job employers, job creators, do charities consider themselves within that, or do they need to be mentioned specifically?
Well, I think they probably need to be a little bit more specific because the recognition here was a small firm, and I don't know that they would see themselves as a firm, even though they would see themselves as social entrepreneurs and as operating related businesses as charities. So it's just a clarification that could really help in future.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I want to thank all of you for being here, both in Ottawa and in Quebec City, Québec, Ville de Québec. Merci beaucoup pour votre présentation, vos présentations, vos réponses à nos questions. Thank you so much for your input into this very lively discussion here this evening. Thank you, colleagues. Meeting adjourned.